over a year since I told you what's going on with the costume project I've been working on. Kinda makes me nauseous to say that out loud. Today, we're gonna be smashing together cosplay and historical fashion because this is what I sketched for that project. I sketched this so long ago, this image is almost as old as the It's Corn kid. Sped up Bloody Mary was trending when I drew this. That's how long it's been. And I've been calling this my Lavender Town Witch project. This concept is inspired by homespun fantasy core aesthetic and the dramatic silhouettes of the 1890s, combined with the original generation of 1998 Pokemon, and nostalgia, and that formatively spooky, scary ghost town. Now, we're not making this whole entire thing today. Our task here is really straightforward and simple. I'm just gonna wrap up the historical support garments I need for this cosplay. I already made a whole entire petticoat, so most of the work is done. I've just got one or two little things to knock out, and then we're gonna... I've gotta stop lying to you. The crafting you're about to see is not simple and straightforward. But even more than that, the further I got down the rabbit hole trying to bring together what historical fashion is all about and what cosplay is all about, the more I realized I was out of my league. I'm not a dress historian, and I'm also just one person with one singular perspective. Even if I succeed in articulating some interesting and neat thoughts about how these two can come together, they'd still just be my thoughts from a single viewpoint. That's exactly what the friends on my screen are here to remedy. For the first time on this channel, I sat down with 4 of the most inspiring creators out there, who are each combining different elements of historical costuming and cosplay in profoundly cool ways. The way this lineup is stacked to the heavens. I talked to each of them about what they do and why and how they do it. I asked them about how they got started and how you can too, and why they think these communities and crafts can be so different but still have so much in common. I cannot wait for you to meet these 4 people, but first, I've got to pass it off to a much stupider version of myself. A version of myself who really thought I was mostly going to be just reusing structural garments that I had already made before. Take it away, past lizard, if you please. My lizard. My friends, we have a little problem on our hands. A couple nights ago, I finished making the mock-up for the shirtwaist for this project, and I realized that the structural garments I had for it are not gonna cut it. This is the corset cover I was planning on using. I made this back in 2017. You might recognize it from the very end of the petticoat video. It's gorgeous, it's extra, it's well made, and unfortunately it's just not gonna work. A corset cover generally refers to like a shirty undergarment that's worn over the corset but under your outerwear. These serve a lot of different purposes. They can like smooth out the lines of your corset, they can provide a little bit of modesty if the top is very sheer. And once you get into the 1890s and then the Edwardian era in the early 20th century, corset covers can definitely help build out that kind of weird avian bird front that they were so fond of. They really wanted to look like pigeons all the time. Who can blame them? I also would like to look like I have a pillow strapped to the front of me. Yeah, I get it. You may not like it, but this is what peak physical fitness looks like. Also, just to like, you know, raise the stakes a little bit, to add a little bit of heat, I'm gonna be making it out of this tiny scrap of fabric that is left over from making the petticoat. This is all I have left. It's not a lot. I think this is less than 1/4 yard. I don't know if it'll be enough, and we're just gonna find out together. I cut out most of the pattern pieces last night and got the majority of them on there. Some of them are gonna get a little funky and we'll figure it out later. If you watch the video where I made the matching petticoat, you know that I did my math wrong and did end up with twice as much trim as I needed. So honestly, the majority of this corset cover project is figuring out where I want to put the extra trim. I've got a lot of lace, I want it to look cute, I want it to look symmetrical. I've got a crafting stream today for my members, so I think I'm gonna do most of that actual sewing on the stream, because honestly it's really just like side seams, shoulder seams. I think I'm gonna do French seams because that's always my go-to for undergarments. The pattern I'm working off of has like an evening view and a daytime view, and what I ended up making was like a combination of both of them. And the pattern that I am using is a truly Victorian pattern. I'm being like kind of cagey about it, not because I'm a gatekeeper, but because at the time of this filming, I don't feel great about Truly Victorian as a company because of some things that their owner has said and done at the past. Maybe I'll talk about it more in this video, but like for now, I would advise buying secondhand Truly Victorian. And real talk, if anyone has like recommendations for pattern companies for historical garments that aren't truly Victorian, please drop them in the comments below. You probably know way better than me. Editing Lizard here. This isn't a very elegant aside, but both the Truly Victorian thing and some alternate pattern recommendations do come up later, so just watch a little bit further before you send that comment. The majority of the crafting on this corset cover I got done on the exact same day I was heading out of town to see my family for American Thanksgiving, and I'm here now on the other side of that holiday with the cover completely done. My only budget on this top was getting buttons from Pacific Trimming to match the fabric and getting buttonholes done at Jonathan Embroidery. If you've been here before, you know that my machine just hates doing buttonholes, and I also hate them, so I just pay at Jonathan Embroidery to get them done. It's a cute little tailor shop on 38th. You can get the buttonholes done for something like $1 a pop. I've been going to them for almost a decade at this point, and I can't recommend them enough. True friend of the channel, Jonathan Embroidery. And here is the finished corset cover. Like, these buttonholes are gorgeous. I would not have been able to make this happen on my own. Yeah, when I got back in town, all I had left to do was the closures in the front and also binding the armholes. I just did that with bias tape. Oh, and yeah, you can see on the back here, I did run out of fabric for this bottom binding, and instead I just added a seam in the back here because life's short. Piecing is period. Who the f cares? I haven't mentioned this yet, but another really great thing about building corset covers and additional support layers is that this is one more layer in between my human body and the cosplay. Human bodies sweat. They produce oil. It's what they do. We are mammals. As Brennan Lee Mulligan once said, you know, we can't all be like the elevated, heightened Skeksis, ethereal thought beings. Some of us are pod people.
Some of us sweat from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep. Some of our bodies are betraying us constantly.
We're all pod people, actually. We're all mammals and we're all gonna sweat. What would you rather put in the laundry bag and take to the laundromat? The actual costume that you put so much time and effort and care into, or something that you sewed in like a day? I can crumple this up and chuck it across my room, and that's what it's built to do. I don't know how good it's gonna look with this shirt, but let's see. I'm really not beating the all I own is purple clothing allegations with this one, huh? The sun is actively setting right now, so I'm gonna like get a nice full body shot of this when it's not dark in that corner of the room. So for now, that means I need to get back to the shirtwaist. The shirtwaist is what's going to eventually go over top of this corset cover. You saw the mock-up earlier, and you'll see the finished outer garment in a long-form video that I'm still editing, or you can see it on shorts right now, if you're nasty. This winter you're seeing right now, I was patterning the skirt, I was figuring out making a hat, I was scrambling for a CatsuCon 2023 deadline that I soundly missed. CatsuCon is in February if you live a better life than me and don't know when CatsuCon is. So when we get back to crafting again in this video, it'll be a few months after I made this corset cover. It'll be spring of 2023. But before we time travel, I want to start introducing you to the 4 creators I've been talking to. Let's begin with something beginning-y. How did they get started doing what they do?
That was my first ever big historical build because I saw the live action Beauty and the Beast and went, y'all fucked it up.
They did though.
It filled me with such a desire. It didn't fill me with rage. It filled me with such a desire to make something because I wanted to make something that fit my vision and like felt good to me. This was like 2017, so this was very early in my cosplay career.
We were first meeting around then,
Yeah.
so that's the wild thing. I always forget that we kind of like got in on the ground floor as buds.
Yeah,
you know.
I have a picture of me and Hillary in my car from that hall mat that I wore Belle at, and Hillary is fully painted blue for Steven Universe cosplay.
Yeah.
I'm so honored to be here, like so legitimately honored to be, because you have the historical costuming greats in this video.
As somebody who always was a sewing-based person who also happened to do armory stuff as well, but like the part that I enjoyed was sewing. The thing that really got the sewing cosplayers hooked onto as like a challenge build was Sakizo. And so much of Sakizo is historically inspired, and it's like history based with just like ruffles and frills of a theme thrown on top. Because of that, I started following a few other random creators who had an interest in Sakizo, and as time went on, they actually shifted to be historical costuming more than anything. And that was when I sort of saw that and I was like, oh, I am interested in this, but I am also a brown woman. I mistakenly thought that historical costuming was the same as historical reenactment, and I was like, terrified. I spent a lot of time not having the courage to step into that space because I assumed it would be unfriendly for a very long time. However, in 2020, my friend Noelle, she had like put out a call to people because she was setting up like an online version of a convention that had gotten canceled. And so she put out a call to people and she was like, I want to do a panel on inclusion in costuming and why it's important. So I joined that panel. I became friends with Noelle, and Noelle's like, hey, historical costumes are not that scary. And if it is scary, you could just come to things with me and I'll punch people for you if they're mean to you. And I'm like, oh, thanks.
I have been a specifically Shakespeare nerd, like my whole life. Like as soon as I could read, my parents were big readers and we were very big on like education and learn all the classics and all that. So when I got into Shakespeare, I thought I wanted to be in the theater and I was going to travel the world and do all these things, and that was not the case. It was very much like, well, I can't travel the world and do theater. I'm going to go to the Ren Fair. And that was the time. That was what did it for me. I walked through the gates and I saw people dressed up and I was like, what is this? I can do this? Like in my free time, I can put on fancy clothes. We walked through the gates and it was just like, this is in Pennsylvania. Like, what is happening? You know, a couple hours on the road. What is this? I was completely transformed, right? I was like, oh, this is what I do now. I'm a Rennie. And everyone's having a good time, and there's like unicorns and fairies, and so you get the best bits of historical and fantasy and sometimes, you know, random sci-fi and anime characters walking by. My mind was blown. I immediately went home and started like getting on blogs because I'm old and we had blogs in the way back. I had been sewing since I was younger because my whole family kind of sews in some capacity, and that kind of evolved into this, oh, well, what do they really wear, you know, in the 16th century or sometimes in the medieval period or whatever. And that just dropped me down the rabbit hole of historical everything. Yeah, my closet proves that. Luckily, my spouse is very cool with it. He will dress up in whatever I put him in, and the kids are down. They love it. And so it's something we can do together. It brings families together. You know, it's very like, this is what we do now.
So I was on my college campus and I was walking around and I saw this girl wearing a medieval dress and I was like, ooh, I want to be friends with her. So I went to her and was like, what's up with this? And she told me that she had made her dress and she was actually recruiting for a costume club and she had flyers. The people there kind of showed me the basics of sewing. I didn't own my own sewing machine at the time. Everybody was nice. That was the important thing that got me interested. Was like, I'm having fun with these people. So I started attending other things, meeting other people, and just got sucked into this vortex of costuming. I think it definitely helped having a group of people that were my age because we were all on a budget and had similar kind of goals for things. I think it would have been intimidating if I was going into a group where people were very experienced with lots of resources.
The intimidation factor came up a lot in these conversations. It can be really scary to be a beginner, especially when you already know that other people are already experts. And it can be so overwhelming to even know where to start. This is going to come up a lot in these talks. True story, there's a part of the Lavender Town Witch build that I'm going to go more in depth on in future videos where I decided that I wanted to design some embroidery. I have never embroidered beyond a running stitch before. Classic cosplayer move. I legitimately did not know where to start teaching myself embroidery, and I ended up taking Ginny Nunez's class on modern embroidery. And this is the sampler that I made as part of the class. I loved that on the class page I could see the samplers other people had made while I was making my own. It really made me feel like I was crafting with fellow embroiderers. And I understand these stitches so much more now because I have done them. Like, I learned through doing instead of through squinting at my phone trying to figure it out. Skillshare was the place I turned to when I wanted to learn something new. It's the largest online community for creatives and hobbyists. There are literally thousands of classes led by industry professionals. You can take classes on music or painting or video production or software like Blender or creative freelancing. And if you're feeling that information overload and aren't sure where to start, Skillshare has designed learning paths to get you started on that journey. These are curated classes that build on one another over a ton of different categories and experience levels. I actually just started one called Next Level Procreate, and I'm very excited to up my digital art game for costume renderings. I'm gonna learn all the little gestures. Gonna be swiping and doing all of that on Procreate. But enough about me. What are you really excited about learning? Skillshare is the place to invest that excitement and creative energy and start learning new skills. The first 500 people to use my link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I've been working on the skirt for a few weeks now, and unfortunately we have run into another fun and spicy little roadblock. So I want the skirt to be really full and really swishy, and I especially want it to have a lot of fullness in the back. This is why I've said that I'm aiming loosely 1890s, because that tended to be what skirts in that era were. They were very full, they were very dramatic, but they didn't use any cages or crinolines. It was all really buck wild petticoats. But here's the problem that people in the 1890s also had. When your skirt is very full in general, and especially very full in the back, the waistband will sag in the back because it's just holding up a lot of weight, and it's holding up a lot more weight in one spot than in another. So it's time once more to make a support garment that I really thought I could get away with not making. It's time to make a bustle pad. A bustle pad is basically just a little pillow for your backside. The kind I'm talking about is usually made with stuffing or batting. It's not made out of wires and hoops and boning like you can see with the lobster bustles in earlier eras. It just adds a little bit of structure and support that the human body does not, right where the skirt is at its fullest in the back. And I'm gonna be so honest, a big part of the reason why I didn't want to make a bustle pad is because one of the big ways that Victorians would get that very feminine hourglass silhouette is it's a combination of cinching down the waist and padding out the bust and the hips. And for me, as a trans masc person, I don't want to pad my hips for this costume. I'm fine with them the way they are, but my skirt is not fine with them the way they are. I've been working way too hard on the skirt for it to end up hanging poorly just because I don't feel like making a structural garment. So we're making a structural garment. I looked at a bunch of pictures on Pinterest for what bustle pads should look like. I watched a single Bernadette Banner video, and if she can make one in a day, I too can make one in a day. Bernadette Senpai says I can do it, so let's fucking go. I start by deploying the sacred ancient cosplayer technique of grabbing some muslin and a Sharpie and just kind of drawing a vague outline on my body. I think another reason why I was struggling to find motivation to make this is that when I was looking up resources for how to make a bustle pad or a bum pad or whatever you want to call it, so many of the people that are sewing these are sewing them as people that are interested in the history. They're trying to recreate something accurately and faithfully because they're really interested in this period of history and in the history of dress. And that's not personally my goal right now. I just want this skirt to not look like shit. The thing that honestly kind of broke me out of this like failure to find the motivation to actually get started was two things. It was the fact that I decided I really didn't feel like spending money on this, so I was going to try and make it a complete stash bust. And also, I'm gonna make it lavender. I think my completely non-historical plan for this is I'm going to have the bottom layer be a non-stretch fabric and the top layer be a stretch fabric. This way, when I put the batting in the bustle pad itself, it will fill out a little bit more on the top and not as much on the side that's resting against my body. I have a microscopic amount of fabric left over from that corset cover, and I think that's gonna be the bottom. And then for the top, I have this more like periwinkle stretch floral fabric that I got in 2011. It's part of the set of an experimental theater piece that I was part of. I've never used it for something, and I'm very excited to use it now. It's a little bit too cool tone for what I'm working with, but I realized that if I layer a pink spandex underneath of it, the two kind of balance out so that from far away, it looks like a lavender that's more on par with the lavenders I'm using for everything else in this project. And that pink fabric that's going underneath is actually fabric I used for my Princess Bubblegum cosplay, because I didn't know what I was doing when I was making that costume. And I did ruched decorations with stretch fabric on a ball gown. Another thing in my stash that I bought ages ago and have actually never used is this pleated purple ribbon trim. My favorite fabric store in the city went out of business in 2016. I mourn P&S Fabrics in Chinatown every single day. But when they were going out of business, they had some really wild sales, and I picked up a lot of yards of this thinking I would use it for something someday. Today is that day, I guess. So, you know, it didn't quite end up being a single day make, but at least I got the big pocket part sewn yesterday, and that means today I just need to get in channels and pop a waistband on. Yeah, it really is just a pillow. That's kind of it. I'm adding a little, you know, top stitching here and there to make sure it looks cute. I'm trying to make sure my channels are like even and going to look okay, but it's pretty straightforward. I made this one purely on vibes, and I'm just crossing my fingers that it's going to get the job done. This is how you can tell I was over it. It's done now, but I literally just like popped some bias tape on here with a big honkin' zigzag stitch. This is absolutely the sloppiest thing I have in this entire project. Look at this. I am showing this to you now to let you know that we're all over it sometimes. I have a lot of motivation. I like working on this project. I did not really enjoy making this, but that I think also has more to do with me and the place that I'm at on this project. But it's done now, and I think it's gonna help me out. And the decision to go Oops All Lavender is a massive slay. So this is just going to rest on my back, and then I will tie it in the front like that when I eventually finish this cosplay. Oh, Lizard. Quote unquote eventually is still a ways off, bud. Once I finished this bustle pad, I still honestly kind of struggled to finish the full skirt that goes over it. We'll pick back up a few months later in the fall of 2023 when I have a lot more self-awareness to talk about what happened, but first I want you to get to know our first guest a little bit better. I want to tell you all about the ways that Shasta at Sci-Fi Cheer Girl combines historical fashion with the characters she loves, except wait, she can do that better than me, hang on.
My first like comic hero was Batgirl. I made Superman for my husband. He was Clark of Kent. He was my 16th century guy. I've got red damask and I've got blue damask and red twill. I'm going to make you a doublet and slops, so it's no different than, it's not going to be tight, it's not going to be anything crazy. He's like, whatever. And he absolutely looked like Superman. And the only Superman-esque thing that I really did was to string a belt buckle that had the S shield. It was like I bought at Comic-Con, a gold belt buckle. It kind of sat on his chest like a chain of office, and I had strung some ribbon through it. As soon as I saw his being done, I was like, oh, I need something. I'm gonna be Batgirl. So I was just pulling out old fabrics I had that were all black. I had some gold piping, and I did my first couching. So I had to make the design on velour or velvet or some nonsensical fabric in chalk. Didn't know what I was doing, made it up as I went along. I had to stitch the couching thread into the bat symbol, and that was on my chest. And then I went to the Ren Fair and I found a black leather mask that kind of looked like a bat, and I wanted to kind of combine all of the different Batgirls. So I had like Stephanie Brown and a little bit of Cassie Kane, little touches. I put like glass vials that you would see in a 16th century apothecary shop or whatever, and I put like lavender in them to put enemies to sleep, and I put like little beads in them to trip the enemies. And I got like a tassel or curtain cord that was like my bolos to like trip the enemies. Mind you, I'm not actually fighting in it, but it made me feel better, and it was just little nods to a series that I love that I could wear to the Ren Fair. And when we wore it to Comic-Con, like people got it, and I felt so validated. Princess Allura, which I did as like an 18th century Italian gown. I know there's an episode where they all fall asleep because of flower, and it's her favorite flower. So since I'm doing 18th century, I'm going to do a cotton printed flower fabric, which is absolutely, you know, the thing you do in the 18th century. But also it's going to be a flower from space that doesn't actually exist. So I'm going to make this fabric, and that was great. And then I needed to like 3D print the hat pin because I didn't quite have the shape I wanted for a hat pin, and I didn't have the beads, and I didn't want to go to Joann's. And then I'm going to like buy stuffed animals because I need to have the 5 Voltron cats in different colors. But then I'm going to hand stitch them little collars because that's what you would do if you were, you know, but then I had, you know, elf ears on. So it was just this weird, like, I'm gonna do this modern thing that's not really modern, and it's kind of a reproduction, and then I've got my like fancy reproduction shoes. Like, it was a lot, and it took every single tool and skill that I had, but at the end I can still just wear the dress to like a garden stroll, or I can wear it, well, I probably wouldn't, but I could wear it to Comic-Con. The 16th century was just like my relaxing, I can do this, I can make a kirtle and put a little hat on, don't have to do my hair. I love it. I think that's why I love the 16th century so much, because it's absurd. It's completely absurd, especially once you get later in the period and you've got these ruffs that like you can't move your head around on, and there's starch, and like every time I have to starch something in the kitchen, I've got like oh gosh, what are they? Oh my gosh,
like a flat iron?
Not even a flat iron, the curling iron, right? Curling iron.
Yeah, curling iron.
And you have to like take off the little tips, so you've just got the metal bit, and then I just sit in the kitchen with my smelly starch that I made from scratch, because God forbid I just use like spray starch or something. I call myself a costumer, a hobby costumer specifically, because people keep sending me commission requests, and I'm like, y'all, I don't have time to make this, you know, pair of leather shoes that I don't need. It covers all of my like my need to like be away from people but also be involved in a thing. But also this takes up all of my extra time. I haven't played a video game in 2 weeks. Like my poor D&D group, like I think we meet sometime at some point. I could be totally happy if this were the hobby for the rest of my life. It just makes me so happy. I'm able to find the joy in things. There's always something I can do. Again, whether it's cosplay specific or historical costuming specific, there's always something I can just pull out and do and be happy about it.
I feel like it's so kind of connected to the sense of whimsy that comes with cosplay and the sense of like personal connection.
Yeah.
Because like with historical costuming, it can be very academic. It can be people that come at it from the perspective of being interested in the history. It can be very technique forward. And it's not a better or worse. It's just a like, they're different kind of things. And that's why like I love seeing the way that you will do like Ren Fair or like historical versions of these characters. It feels so joyful because there just aren't as many people doing that.
I worked in a museum, but I had no interest in doing reenactments and living history and, you know, the historical LARPing, SCA. When I started going to Ren Fairs and everybody's like, yeah, do what you want. And I was like, okay. But then when I started hitting that 18th century thing a few years ago, it was like, oh, wow, this might have been what I was looking for the whole time. Historical costuming kind of gave me that sense of, I don't want to say purpose, I know there's a better word here, but it gave me that sense of this is something I needed to do, because I didn't start going to like Comic-Con, like pop culture cons until 2009. So by then I had already been going to Ren Fairs for like years. And our friends were like, you guys should definitely go to Comic-Con. And we went, and that was the last time I went to a con without a costume on. Oh, I can wear stuff here too. Let me learn what spandex is. It was a completely different language, even coming from someone who had been sewing for so long. When it came down to, well, you know, if I wear this gown and make it look like Batgirl, or not gown, but you know, I have this outfit, I'm gonna make it look like Batgirl. No one at the con is gonna question me, and I can still wear it to the Ren Fair. And that's one of the costumes that I ended up doing. It was just like, this is the best of both worlds, and I'm comfortable. And you know, a couple people thought it was really cool, and a couple people were like, what is happening here?
Talking with Shasta reminded me that this is part of why I vibe so hard with people who do mashups and crossovers. We're doing it because it makes us happy, not because other people are necessarily going to get it. It's definitely been a little tough to keep connected to that reminder that this is actually what I love doing, as I'm kind of spinning my wheels on this build. So let's bop on back to a lizard who's climbing back on the horse circa last fall, and buckle up for realsies, because this is actually legit where I start to turn my shit around. I've talked a lot about the way that I got really burnt out on this project and I needed to take a break in the spring and summer, but today here in this honesty corner, I want to be real that I always felt kind of weird calling it burnout. I just have kind of mixed feelings about the way that the internet and discourse can turn like a very internal experience into like a buzzword or like SEO, you know? There were so many really specific factors that went into me losing the reins on this project. And I'm not going to go into each and every single one of them today because we truly don't have time. We're already excavating way too deep on fabric. We do not need to excavate that deep into my psyche. But one of the specific things that really biffed up the timeline is exactly what this video is about. I hit a point where I felt like I couldn't make the shirtwaist until I made the corset cover, and I couldn't finish the skirt until I made the bustle pad to see where the hemline would hit. And then these like less glamorous, less good for the relentless churn of content projects ended up getting built up in my mind as like in a very task paralysis kind of way. I felt like I wasn't posting enough, so I didn't want to take the time to do something the right way if I felt like that would be bad for content and bad for posting. But then that meant that it never got done, so I didn't feel like I could move on to the next step. And I got so stuck in like a spiral trying to figure out the most optimized schedule for when exactly I should be doing each specific task, including, you know, editing and posting and all of the other stuff that goes into this very weird job, that the time just completely got away from me, even though I was working like a million hours every single day, hustling so hard to try and get this done. So thank you for indulging me and joining me in that little honesty moment about what actually happened when I say burnout, because for a third fucking time, I realized there was something that I absolutely had to make. So many of the things that I've read about 1890s petticoats talk about wearing multiple petticoats to get the amount of support you need for the really full skirts. And this was the toughest pill of all to swallow, because I have already made an entire fucking video about making a purple petticoat. I was absolutely driving myself into the ground trying to think of ways to make a second purple petticoat, the exact same project, interesting, or if I could just source what I needed, or if I could borrow it, maybe from a friend, and eventually I decided to just give up. I did not film any part of me making this petticoat because I needed to just knock it out. Since I was editing during the day, this took maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks worth of nights without me stopping to film everything. The one major difference is that this petticoat I did make out of 100% cotton. The first one I made, I got really budget fabric, and when I did a burn test at home, it turned out to be polyester. Because of that, I needed to do a lot of reverse engineering with adding in horsehair braid and making sure it had the structure to support a skirt. This cotton is comparatively really flimsy. However, with cotton I can use spray starch. I didn't realize this was in grabbing distance, and I was really excited to be able to get that shot. Starch is corn, I think? I will look it up. Okay, so the what is starch iceberg went way deeper than I thought. Wikipedia told me that starch is like the energy reserve of a lot of plants, which makes sense why starchy foods are so nutrient dense. Plants are so fucking metal. All that from a single kind of molecule? I can't believe I just said it was corn. Someone's gotta tell the corn kid. Starch is still used in cuffs and collars in a lot of menswear, and what starch does is it basically just stiffens fabric. In my experience, it can get a little funky with blends, but starch definitely works best on natural fibers like cotton and linen. Polyester, it's really not gonna do as much because of something chemical and magical that happens with the plants. It's plant on plant. You want plant on plant. Plant on plastic, nothing happen. Science. I have read a lot of blog posts about the way that people in the historical community will starch their petticoats. They have a lot of really great recipes. They will get a huge vat and they will dunk the whole petticoat in there. It gets like, completely drenched and then it dries outside. I'm a New Yorker and I don't have an outside, so I am going to take advantage of modern technology and use the spray starch in my shower and make this be a completely different texture than it is right now. Also, the fact that this is made out of cotton as opposed to the polyester means that this was more than twice as expensive to make. Well, we'll see if it ends up being worth it. I'm gonna go starch the shit out of this, and we'll see if then we have enough structure to hold up the fabulous, fabulous skirt that is still not done. The way that I try to absolutely saturate this skirt in starch does mean that it's better to do it in the shower, where it can, drip freely into the bathtub instead of in my workroom. And I would call this a mixed success. It definitely gave the skirt a lot more body, but probably still not quite as much structure as I need. So I think in spite of it all, my next step is going to be adding some horsehair along those seams, like I did with the original petticoat. Also, hi. It's actually a week after KatsuCon right now. At time of recording, as all the cool YouTubers say, I have actually debuted the 1.0 version of this costume. And that might be surprising to you if you are where I think you are in the runtime of this video. What is the grand finale doing here in the middle? But that's what I kind of like about doing a 1.0 wear of something. It means that instead of a cosplay being a big grand finale where everything is done and we're not changing anything, it means that we can go back and add some fixes. And especially for a project like figuring out these structural support garments for a costume, doing a 1.0 wear is a really great idea because I now have a really clear to-do list of stuff that I want to change, like adding horsehair to the petticoat. I'll share more about what those last few weeks of Katsu Crunch 2024 were like, but the spoiler-free review is that KatsuCon was transcendent, and wearing this cosplay for the first time, even if it's still a work in progress, was unreal. The fact that it's a week after KatsuCon also means that I have already machine washed the chemise and the corset cover, and they survived. They came out great. It feels so amazing to be able to actually wash and launder parts of this costume. For my money, the bustle pad worked pretty good. I'm gonna hold on making any additional changes to that because right now I don't super think it needs anything, but there's one really big change that I am making. Is it a little bit evil to artificially create a cliffhanger here? Maybe, potentially. Scholars are divided. Sorry, I'm just impatient to introduce you to our second guest, Vic at Vicious Frockery. He fucking rules. No preamble, we cut straight to the next segment like men. That is one of the things that I really love about the work that you do is that I feel like you are so good at not having a preciousness about techniques and materials, and it enables you to make really fucking good work without the same kind of ennui that I can sometimes see in myself and in a lot of other people. I'm thinking about the fact that you used puff paint for your Molly Mock coat.
Oh, yeah.
I love that Molly Mock coat so much. And I love that, like, in a culture of like Mollymauk cosplayers where it can be so about the level of like suffering that you put into that coat, and it has to be like, I spent hundreds of hours and I did blah blah blah. If you want to do that, that's great, but it shouldn't
Yeah.
be like a who has the biggest suffering stick for how long they took to make this cosplay.
In my, early stabs at like doing historical cosplay, I learned a lot about material and how material sort of acts. And I am always balling on a budget. So Belle and Mollymauk are made of the same fabric, like fake taffeta. And if I had sat there and embroidered Mollymauk on that fabric, I would have been fighting myself the entire time. Yeah, I could spend a lot of time reinforcing this. I could use another material. I could do something else with this. I could sit here and embroider it and really, enter the suffering game. Or I could just puff paint it. And sometimes just deciding to puff paint it is the right call, because it's the affordable one, it's the one that's accessible, and it's the one that's gonna pay off the most. My original Belle costume, which I sold it for $40. It's no longer in my possession. I know.
$40?
There's something in me, like you're speaking about, like lack of preciousness. I'm not even precious about the stuff that I've made. I sold Percy. I think I put like an easy 300 hours in there, and I didn't count a single one of them. I made him over the pandemic in a like blind fit of I want to learn how to pad stitch, and I want to learn how to like do good soutache. And a lot of people do it by hand and like insist on doing it by hand, but I found this one video of this guy. He has a free arm sewing machine, and then I was like, oh, okay, I can absolutely do that on my entry level sewing machine, and I pulled the foot off and then did it that way, and it worked fine. I made a 1770s officer's coat pattern, and I think that pattern has ended up in at least 2 other costumes by now, because I've been able to modify it so many times. I forget that Percy even was like a 1770s pattern because I've used it so many times at this point. And then I ended up selling him because it's just like, I would rather this get worn. Percy directly related to like my witch hat costume, even though neither of those capes were actually historical at all. I just used the same techniques. There are some things that I do consider historical, like Yennefer I 100% consider a historical build because I so heavily referenced like Singer Sargent's like Madame X painting, and I really referenced this one specific like House of Worth gown, and I really loved the way that like the velvet kind of melted up from the floor, and I just wanted to make that so bad. And I thought that it was something that Yen would wear, so I was like, oh, 1-to-1, we're just gonna do that when I'm trying to like fix fit issues or when I'm trying to make sure that something lays completely flat. It ends up having the horsehair in it. It ends up being hand-basted. It ends up being pad-stitched. Like, now that I know that is going to pay off in the end and it's gonna make my life a little bit easier, I could have sat there and glued down all of that lace, but I felt really strongly that it was gonna pay off if I basted everything down and then did my top stitching rather than trying to shove it through my machine, because I tried. I felt that was a place I didn't want to cut a corner, and then the inside of the skirt that gets flipped inside out completely raw. Like there's corners to cut and then there's corners that you don't need to cut. Amelia, what I really wanted to do was I just wanted to make a dog head. It was my first ever crack at it, first ever try. I learned so much about how things function, and I want to remake it and have it be even bigger and better and like movable. It became a historical build somehow. I don't know how exactly. Like if you look at images of Vicar Amelia from the game, she's all dog mode all the time. Okay, so Vicar Amelia is one of the first bosses in Bloodborne. So you are kind of dropped into this like London-esque world. You come into this little like chapel thing, and there's a young woman there who's kind of crying, and you're immediately cut into a cutscene, and you're like, wait a second, hold on. I am not here to fight anything yet. You're super underleveled. The map is not even unlocked yet. There's this like long pan that slowly gets closer to this young woman who is like lamenting about how much she does not want to change. Surely the church will fix her. And then she just absolutely morphs into giant dog woman with chicken feet. And there's something about the like way that the puppetry happens in the game and the way that the camera sort of pulls in and then immediately back out, and then you're like forced to reckon with this like dog that's literally snaking at you with an extra long spine, and you're like, this is it. That like concept of transformation was something that I really wanted to capitalize on, and it slowly kind of came to me like, oh, I could make this a historical build. So I just started cobbling things together. For Bloodborne, like you have to nail like late Victorian, and that's it. That's all you have to do. Because if you're covered in blood and look vaguely threatening from a Victorian era, someone is going to suggest Bloodborne, period. Honestly, I love that freaking costume because the most unassuming people will come up to me, like young women will come up to me in that costume and go, wow, I love Bloodborne so much. And I'm always like, yes! Yes! It's the best. It's the freaking best. Something about the attraction to astral horror that just is so universal, and I love it so much. Man, I literally have Zelda smocking behind me. I was thinking about like my upcoming builds in Zelda, and I really thought about it and was like, wow, all of the women that I like to cosplay, they always end up being historical, and 2 of them out of like 4 now are fully mid becoming a monster, like fully mid transformation into some kind of eldritch horror of some persuasion. Watching Mark play through Tears of the Kingdom and playing through like Breath of the Wild myself, that feeling of like, oh, I have to get through it, like this call of I have to get through this, I have to make this right, I have to solve it, is so inherent. Yeah, that's what I want to cosplay. I'm not just like Link little elf boy neat. I'm like, no, I need to encapsulate the concept of transforming yourself out of love in a way that may or may not endure. Like, I need that. I need to cosplay that.
I'm debating making a new corset for this build, but
Yeah.
I am newly decided that I am actually going to make a new corset for this build. Don't do this. Literally don't. This is not the order of operations that you should be doing things in at all. I have just lost my damn mind and I've decided that I'm making another corset about it. The main reason why I'm like going back and doing what should have been step 1, step 0 even, now a year and some change into this build is mainly because there's a big structural engineering heavy prop that I didn't get done in time for Katsucon, but that I think is going to really benefit from having a really sound structural layer, and potentially a really sound structural layer, like a corset, that I can build on top of. So this might be a corset that is used just for this cosplay. And having now spent some time wearing that 2014 cupcake corset around, I'm feeling the errors in it a little bit more. It's a shame because it is very well seasoned to my body, it fits very well, but I do notice that it is a little bit too short in the waist. I was just making, length adjustments on length adjustments on length adjustments, and it ended up being a little bit too short. Another factor is when I made this corset, I was intending to lace down quite a bit more. I was intending to lace it tighter so I could get more waist reduction. And for this costume, the Pokemon Witch cosplay, I am not trying to tight lace at all. I am trying to make this be something that I can wear comfortably for like 6, 8, 10 hours. The corset still fits, but there is just a lot of real estate on the back where it's just laces. And I am noticing that the back support isn't quite as good because I don't have the bones supporting it. Another reason why I'm genuinely excited about making this corset is that the first corset I made using a truly Victorian pattern. I have a lot of truly Victorian patterns on hand. I bought them 10 years ago when I was first getting started making some historical reproductions. And as time has gone on, the owner of that company has said and done some things that don't align with my beliefs. Okay, I definitely owe you an explanation on why I and a lot of other creators have dumped truly Victorian. As briefly as I can humanly put it, in 2022, Costume College, which is a generally well-regarded event in the historical dress scene with really high-quality educational programming, announced its theme for the next year. That theme was the Silk Road. Now, plenty of costumers of color in the scene rightfully pointed out that creating a theme focusing on the dress of cultures that have been colonized and dress that can be highly orientalized and appropriated, the event was running the risk of actively inviting that. The owner of Truly Victorian was among those who thought that this was going too far. The implication here is that she is a better judge of what counts as too far, and she and her judgment should be the arbiter of what's appreciative and what's appropriative. And of course, when there was some pushback around this comment, she doubled down. She came in with the narrative that this was really about gatekeeping and elitism. Absurd, in my opinion. Allegedly, I guess. So unless and until something big changes about this company, you won't catch me recommending their products. So I was talking with Nami and I was like, man, I'd like to make a corset, but like, I don't really want to use a truly Victorian pattern anymore. And Nami was like, pick up a red threaded pattern. So I was influenced. And I did end up picking up the late Victorian corset instead of the Edwardian one because I find that late Victorian corsets are way more versatile. I know I'm gonna have to season it all over again, but I think a full decade is a more than acceptable lifespan for literally the first corset I ever made. And the one final reason why I am taking this plunge and making a corset is because at MagFest I asked Nami, I was like, hey, when you add padding to corsets, does that padding go between the corset and the body or on the outside of the corset between the corset and the finished garment? And Nami was like, either, both work. And I was like, okay, great. I am planning on having top surgery sometime in the next 2 years, hopefully. And I kind of don't really want to do the work of making sure I have a pattern that fits correctly and go through the whole ordeal of really making sure that it is matched to my body and then to have a body that is completely different. But now that I have received that blessing to just add padding back in when my body eventually changes, I'm just gonna make a corset and I can worry about the padding later. I can worry about that in 2 years when I'm done with all my fucking waiting list. It's a nightmare out there. Godspeed to all my soldiers also in this hustle. We'll get it. We'll get our dates. So yeah, let's make a mock-up, babes. Let's fucking go. One last fun sidebar. Right now, I actually don't have my petticoat with me, the first one that I made in the original video, because I lent it to my friend Vic. He was debuting a really big, really gorgeous, wait, why am I, you know this. I probably already told you this in the video. I need to shut the fuck up. When he made his Zelda, like the night before he left, he was like, man, I wish I had another petticoat in here, but like, I just don't have time to make a third one. And I was like, bro, I have a petticoat. I am not using it on Saturday because I'm wearing the witch on Friday. There have been so many times in this process that I wished that I just like had a friend who could lend me a bustle pad, you know, or have a buddy who had a spare petticoat. But I did not have one, so I had to make them myself. And it felt really fucking awesome to be like, oh, I have a spare petticoat for you. You don't have time to make one? I got you. Living the joy, living the experience of like being able to reuse and rewear these support garments. I haven't edited this video yet, but I have a feeling that that's gonna come up in the edit. Okay, let's make a mock-up. And while I'm jumping into crafting this, it's my literal honor to jump you into our third guest, an absolute icon.
I'm kind of event driven. At this point, I've been sewing for like 20 years. A lot of times it's just like, oh, okay, there's a theme party for this, so I'm making it for that. And so that's why I've accumulated kind of a repertoire, I guess, of all these different eras. So it's not like I necessarily have one specialty. I just started trying out different eras just because I was like, that's weird. I haven't tried that yet. I'm kind of a squirrel when it comes to stuff. I am also fabric driven. Sometimes I'll just see a very shiny fabric because I'm a magpie and I go, I'm going to save this for later and I'll figure out what it is. It'll whisper to me later. And so this particular fabric, it's like a silk brocade, I think originally meant for like men's neckties. It's actually a bunch of little devils. It's a bunch of like little dudes with like little pitchforks. From far away, it just looks like a motif, and up close, you're like, it's very subversive. But then once I like put it all together and I was like, well, I'm gonna do feathers and I do the roses, and I was like, I look like Mothman. I was like, okay, this is actually my Mothman. I was pleased that a number of people at the event were like, this makes me think of Mothman. So that was something where I made it because I needed an 1890s dress, but also the fabric spoke to me. I found this raw silk that was this beautiful emerald green with all these gold threads. That's very Loki fabric. I feel like this is going to be a Loki of some sort, but I didn't know yet what kind. Then there was coming to town, a Sistine Chapel art exhibit. So a friend said, let's go and we can both wear like sort of Borgia's kind of gown. And so I was like, I have this Loki fabric. Let me make a green and gold Renaissance dress. Call it Lokeisha Borgia. I ended up wearing the dress again without the horns because then I was invited to a actual historical Renaissance party. So there were a lot of things happening at the same time, like getting interested in conventions, meeting friends that were interested in cosplay instead of just historical. I feel like, unlike with historical, where there was like, oh, here's my love boat moment. I met this person and we're going to start doing this thing. It was kind of like a lot of simultaneous things. Like, I'm interested in these fandoms. I want to express it in some way. But the other thing too was I decided to get involved in Rebel Legion, which is the Star Wars costuming club. I like the idea of dressing up and visiting kids in hospitals and, you know, doing charity events and things like that. The accuracy for me is a personal challenge that I feel very satisfied in being able to achieve. I feel like also the Star Wars cosplay fandom attracts a lot of women because Padme had all these incredible costumes. A group of my local Rebel Legion friends said, we should totally go to this Bridgerton event, but we should do Star Wars Regency. I just love like the multiple layers of nerdery. So I ended up doing the Regency Princess Leia. If I remove some of the accessories, it looks like just a red Regency dress. But because I have the overgown, the Bespin design, and then various accessories and stuff, and also like by myself, I don't think necessarily everybody would have understood. But because we went as a group, you could see like the aha moment, especially with some of the staff. So I found that silver fabric with the black swirls, and I was like, this is Beskar. I will never see this fabric again. I need to buy it now. So for Her Universe in 2019, I had submitted 2 other Star Wars designs. They didn't get accepted, so I said, okay, I'm going to scrap those designs. I'm going to try something completely different. I was looking at it in a very modular way because I'm used to, for historical costuming, doing a whole ensemble. You have multiple pieces, you have the accessories, and so when I designed the Her Universe look, I wasn't thinking about it in terms of, well, I want to make a dress or I want to make a garment and stuff. Like I was thinking, how can I get a lot of pieces that are going to be working together? Think of the Her Universe fashion show as a job interview for designing a collection. I thought what would be helpful too was to design something with a bunch of pieces to show I could design pieces, remove the cape, for a more casual look, things like that. That's the way I was looking at it. But the star of the piece was going to be that Beskar fabric.
I love all of those builds so much. I just think they're so great. I genuinely love seeing your work on my Instagram feed because I feel like it's always so fun and so creative. I love the way that you, as someone who does more historical stuff, brings in like character silhouettes in a way that is so recognizable. It's just so great. It's actually so funny because for this current build, I have been the worst criminal about that. I know that you were supposed to do the undergarments first. I thought that I had them done. I was like, I've done it. I've done the undergarments. And then I started working on it and I was like, oh no, I need a bustle pad. And then I made a bustle pad. And then I was like, oh no, I need a second petticoat.
I mean, that's normal because sometimes I've thought, oh yeah, I've got that stuff and I put it on and I'm like, I want this to be fluffier. And then I go and add an extra petticoat.
Yeah.
So I think actually the process you're doing, that's normal. I think it's really rare to say like, I've got all the undergarments and nothing else is going to be changing. Everything's perfect.
Yep. I was editing what I filmed the other day and I realized that like I need to normalize providing context. Let me back up a little bit and go a little more in depth with how I'm actually planning on making this corset. The pattern that I am working with has instructions for making generally a single layer corset. It gives you the option of flatlining it with a fashion fabric. A single layer corset is a great option. Generally, you would want to make this out of a fabric like canvas or coutil, but I know for this build, I definitely want to have a fun colored fashion fabric on the inside and outside of this corset, so I am probably not going to be using these directions all that much. If you end up going this direction of having a structural support layer and fashion fabric layers, you can be a little more loosey-goosey with the kind of fabric you're using for your fashion layer, because the structural support layer is going to be doing most of the work providing the structure and support. I mean, I maybe wouldn't use like spandex straight off the bolt, but as long as you interface it. I've done plenty of fabric primes with interfacing. Use whatever fabric you want, as long as you have a structural support layer that is doing the heavy lifting. And in a truly astonishing twist, I've decided I'm not making a lavender corset. I want something to break up the lavender that we've got going on in these support layers, and the corset is a really great place to break up a monochromatic suite of support garments. So I think I'm going gray. I dug through my stash to see if I had anything because you don't need a ton of yardage for a corset, and I found this wonderful dove gray cotton that I've been holding onto for years. I actually got it from PNS Fabrics, my former favorite fabric store that closed, that I got the trim I used on the bustle pad for. I bought this fabric so long ago, I bought it thinking I would use it to make a Charlie cosplay from Supernatural. I never even started that cosplay. This was just in the dark ages of my quasi Super Hulock era, and I thought I should do a Supernatural cosplay because, I don't know. I love this fabric because it has such a warm tone to it. It can almost read purple. I also have this Dupioni that is almost the exact same tone of gray, and speaking of the fact that this gray can honestly read as purple in some situations, I bought this to be my necktie for my historical Jane Porter cosplay. In the animation, that's fully a purple, but I thought it would look too cartoony to have purple and yellow together, so I went with a gray, and honestly, in most of the images, I think it reads pretty purpley. But I have a microscopic amount of this fabric left. Let me see if I can... Why am I doing this one-handed? I don't got a lot left. I definitely am not going to be able to get a full corset's worth out of this. So I went to the garment district to see if they had anything fun for me there, and I did bring a swatch of that cotton. The most astonishing thing happened. I walked into Fabrics Garden with my little swatch, I look at the linen, I turn around to glance at the cotton. The fabric is right there. I didn't even buy this fabric from Fabrics Garden. Do you have any idea how hard it is to find a perfect match for a fabric? This was fate. I bought quite a bit of it actually because I like this gray so much and I never use it because I don't want to run out of it. I can't believe this fabric came back to me an easy 12 to 13 years later. For my support layer, I'm definitely going to be using black canvas. I bought, I think, 12 yards of black canvas in 2019, and I'm trying to work through it as best I can, but I still have so many yards left of it. Because this is a fairly light fabric, both in color and in sheerness level, I don't know how much you can tell. Like, it's pretty sheer. So because of that, I think, going to cut out additional pieces of a white cotton to back this with. I think this means it's gonna end up being a 5-layer corset. Got my structural layer, my fashion fabric layer, the backing, and then 2 of those, 2 fashion layers, 2 backing layers for the inside and the outside. This corset is going to have a busk in the front. I ordered mine from Wawak. It is a ½ inch too short for the pattern, but I figure better too short than too long. Busks are what enable you to get in and out of a corset without needing to slip it off of your head every time. And for boning, I am using a combination, I've already cut some of it. Let me get you your bouquet for you to perceive, of flat steel and spiral steel. The flat steel is the white strips of metal, and the spiral steel is, they're kind of like a crushed slinky almost. It's more of a steel wire that is wound tight and then flattened. The flat steel is a firmer support, the spiral steel is a more flexible support. Generally, you're going to want to use flat steel on the backs and fronts, and spiral steel on the sides. I usually keep a 10-yard roll of each of these on hand. I prefer that to getting the pre-cut lengths. I will get deeper into all of this later, but first, we gotta make that mock-up. Our final guest needs no introduction because I've actually already mentioned her a few times in this video. This is my friend who I talked to about red threaded and padding corsets. Meet Nami at namisparrow.
So for historical costume, at least, it's always been like, I would start with like a fabric that I saw somewhere that I really liked, and I'll be like, oh, I really want to make this into something. And if I have an event that fits with that era of like that dress that I have in mind, then it's perfect. And I definitely think for like historical stuff, it's 100% fibers first for me. But like the thing that will push me into doing a historical thing faster than I do everything else is if I can find some sort of character connection to it. So like the Goldworks gown that I made based off of like the Worth Ironworks gown. The reason I ended up making that when I did was, one, I had the perfect event for it. The Chicago Historical Costuming Society was throwing a ball. It was an Edwardian ball, and it was absinthe themed, so I was like, oh my god, I want to go green. And then the second thing was that one of my favorite book series, The Gilded Wolves, has a character who is an Indian girl who is a dancer, and she like was classically trained as a Bharatanatyam dancer, and she now lives in Paris and is like a fancy lady. And she mentioned, she's like, oh yeah, my couturier Worth got me this gown. In the book, it's like, and it has an ironworks pattern on it. And I'm like, are you telling me this could be an undercover Layla Gilded Wolves cosplay? So that's why I actually ended up making that. Since so much of the costume sits on top of foundational garments that give you the correct shape, it's not on me to have the correct shape. Panini happened to all of us, and we've had like weight fluctuations and appearance fluctuations and all of that. I'm doing way more historical stuff now. Petticoats and the corsets, they do that for me. And all I have to do is exist and be comfortable. Whereas so many, you know, like anime outfits do not have that space. It made it easier for me to be comfortable costuming no matter where my brain was at. Having outfits where my body isn't required to always look correct in my mind or correct to that character, it makes it so much easier to wear those outfits. So for me, the draw for historical costuming has always been, I want to be a pretty princess and I like wearing a ball gown. And that's pretty much as simple as it is for me. And for cosplay, I tend to go a little bit more deeper into it. It's like, I love this character to the depths of my soul, or my BFF is cosplaying this character that they love to the depths of their soul, and I want to stand next to them and be a funky little dude. Cosplay is a really fantastic way for people to understand their identities, especially within queer communities. My friend and I, we are both brown people from the same suburb. And when we were very, very young, we cosplayed the Hitachi twins from Oron High School House Club. And that was the first moment in my life where I experienced gender dysphoria. And I was like, this is not correct. Like, this is not correct. I am not supposed to dress like this boy. Like, why does this feel so wrong? I'm pretty sure that was the first time that he experienced gender euphoria, because he was like, oh my God, this is correct. Something like that can help you explore your gender in a very, very safe space. You know it's clear if a cis woman can notice it, you know? Because I feel like so many people within cosplay are way more comfortable with their genders than people who are not in cosplay. They had so much space to explore it and to be like, no, this is what I like. No, this isn't what I like.
I love like the sense of whimsy that you bring to builds. I think of you as being a very versatile cosplayer. You are capable of doing the kind of like, now I'm wearing it and it's all safety pins and vibes, ha ha ha. But it's like, if you choose to really dig in and be like, we're doing this one for fucking real. We're like matching our rhinestones, we're getting the same fabric, we're using the same pants patterns. I really value the expertise that you bring about the different communities, you know?
The only stat I have is charisma. Every other stat is a dump stat.
That's not true. I'll fight you on that one.
I'll give myself intelligence as well, thank you. I made this in like April of 2020 or like May or June of 2020. Like, it was my first attempt at historical stuff because I saw Morgan Donner make like a beautiful pair of 17th century stays, and I was like, I want them. They're so pretty. I want them in green. And then this was also about the time where I had gotten obsessed with Six the musical. So I was like, what if I made a Anne Boleyn from Six cosplay? That would be so fun. And then my brain went, what if both together, original design and Boleyn, using these stays as the base, and then doing like a little like skater circle skirt and then a chemise underneath. It was the first build I made that incorporated, that was fully like right in between cosplay and historical costuming, because I was like, what if this, but I made it a cosplay? I still remember making that and then like getting more into historical costuming and then also immediately learning all of the mistakes that I made on those days, which was hilarious. Those poor eyelets have been absolutely destroyed, because did you know that raw silk and eyelets are not friends? Because they're not. The main thing that I've like realized now with crafting, at least, is that I don't normally default to hand sewing. With the way that I con crunch and the way that I work on projects, like there ain't nobody got time for that. But also, I will now like let myself hand sew stuff if it sparks joy in the moment. I think as a whole, I've been okay letting myself slow down. You know, before COVID, it was a lot of like overcommitting myself and then having to disappoint people or drop out. And then like now I find myself taking more joy in slowing down on projects and not just like zooming through them at top speed. And like, yeah, sometimes like top speed is what I want to do, but also I'll be going top speed. Sometimes I'll be like, you know what, I want to hand sew this. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? Go for it, girl. If you end up not finishing it, it's fine. You got like 17,000 other things to wear.
Having that mental flexibility with deadlines is a big part of what I was learning working on all these support garments. Missing the finish line on something you really care about can feel like the end of the world. I was honestly gutted when I didn't get the Lavender Town Witch costume done in time for Katsucon at the beginning of 2023, but that just made the 2024 redemption arc all the better. And honestly, a big part of what made that last whirlwind month of crafting this year so special was sharing that excitement with my patrons. Because I'm still catching up on editing, all that progress footage. Patreon is the place where I share up to the moment crafting stuff. And I had so much to share getting ready for Katsu. It felt so good, like it genuinely felt triumphant to be sharing that accomplishment with the people who made it possible. If you want to see what that finished costume looked like, if you want to catch crafting streams or get these deep dive videos early, Patreon is the place to do it. Thank you so much to everyone who supports this channel on there, and especially thank you to Thomas Drury Wang, Phantom Angel 1245, Simrel, Lulu Rush Cosplay, Adoilable, Joe Burrito, Turson, Maggie Holden, Lauren Rogers, Arden Winner, Toria, Stephanie C, KFry84, Hust, and Eli. When I made my first corset mock-up literally a decade ago, I made a mock-up out of muslin, and I did not include boning. And this time, even though I didn't feel like it, I did decide to be lawful neutral and make a mock-up out of canvas and also include boning channels. Honestly, I just used whatever ribbon I had lying around. As soon as I put these boning channels in, I was like filled with a visceral hatred because I was a teenager in the late aughts, and that means that like this color scheme is very like the popular girls in their Victoria's Secret pink core. And I hate it and I don't want it in my room. As you can maybe see, I also skipped the step of inserting a busk. Maybe I should have done that, I don't know. I didn't, so I just have a separating zipper in the front there, but I did make lacing strips, and my goal with these is that when I take apart this mock-up, I will be able to reuse these for other stuff. I used my grommet hand press, and honestly, I still kind of struggled with them. They still really popped out a lot. I don't know if it was just the canvas that I was using, or like, I might honestly put glue in them the next time, because like, they just really kept popping off, and I know you're not supposed to glue grommets. I don't know. So this is the mock-up. I'm gonna give you a little fashion show in a moment, but it's one of those like early March days where it's just weirdly cold, so I'm kind of putting that off as long as I can. And I will spoil it right now. I ended up making the call to not make any adjustments to this pattern at all. And what that means is that I have now cut out most of my fashion fabric pieces. I did this fabric cutting last night while watching Deep Space Nine. I really like the look of visible boning channels, but in this case, I just don't really feel like making them out of the fashion fabric, and I wasn't able to find a twill tape or a ribbon that I thought was a good enough match for the fashion fabric that'll be on the outside. So instead, I think I'm going to put the visible channels on the inside layer of the corset, and I'm gonna use a nice lavender twill tape that I have on hand to make those. It'll be a fun contrast. It'll be a fun little pop of color for the inside of the garment, you know, where no one will see it. I come back to you now in full Victorian ghost child mode to give a little fashion show. I did not bother doing the, ow, I didn't tip these bones and one of them just got me. I did not bother doing the boning channels on the seams. I just did the boning channels that are with the ribbony bits. Already really solid, already a really good look. And this corset, like honestly, all corsets that I wear, I have laced with the bunny ears method so that you can kind of just pull, make sure I've got the right ones. And then you can kind of just do that. It's great. So some of you watching right now are actively shouting at your devices, and deservedly so. I don't think I've made this mistake in over a decade of wearing corsets, but of course the first time I make it is on camera. This is not how you should close a corset with bunny ears. Usually when I make big mistakes, it just kind of feels like, oh, I was just being silly goofy, but I'm genuinely really embarrassed about this one. You should make sure that the ears are crisscrossed behind your back so that you are pulling the sides shut. The way I'm doing it right now, I'm pulling them apart as I'm pulling them shut at the same time, and disasters can occur. Well, so I did break the lace. I guess my grommets had some raw edges on them, so we're not gonna be able to get it any tighter than this. Lessons were learned here today. Regardless, I think you can still get a pretty good look at the way that this fits. It's a little bit loose around the bust. Like the bust is definitely, I'm not filling this out, but knowing that I'm going to have to add padding eventually post top surge, I'm fine with that. It fits very well at the waist and very well at the hip. It's holding its shape even with the lace busting. The fit of this corset is also such that I can close it, which honestly, that's usually not something I'm aiming for. Usually I like to have a, 2-inch lacing gap. However, for this project in specific, it will make my engineering life a lot easier if I just know that I'm lacing it all the way shut. I can't believe I busted a fucking lace. That's one way to end the fitting. Time to tear this bad boy apart. Talking to people who make shit with their hands about the shit that they make is one of my favorite things. I hope you are even half as obsessed as I am with Shasta and Vic and Vivien and Nami after hearing from them. And now that you have gotten to know the 4 creators here, I think it's high time we dig the fuck in. What is the difference between cosplay and historical fashion? As people who have experience across both, what separates these two crafts and communities? And honestly, what brings them together?
I've said for years that I end up cosplaying not my favorite characters, but my favorite character's boyfriend or girlfriend. Or like I'm attracted to something because I love the way that it's built. Or I'm attracted to something because I do want to learn a new technique and I'm attracted to that character rather than the way that they are, or the way that it can be in the historical costuming community, which is very like, I picked an era and I wanted to make this silhouette from this era. Or I have been making piecemeal this wardrobe over a period of years and I'm sort of stacking and adding like new textures, new patterns. I'm like updating things. For costumes it's very much like here's the singular vision.
I feel like not every costume and every cosplay costume necessarily starts with thinking about the undergarments, where historical is more likely to where should I start in terms of the undergarments. Now that doesn't mean everybody has to be accurate, right, with the corset and stuff. Some people just want to put together something for fun, but for people who want to get the correct or reasonable silhouette, they have to start with the undergarments because when you are doing your mock-up for your final garment, you need to do that over the undergarments. I'd say that's one thing that the cosplay community can get from the historical community. One thing I think the historical community can get from the cosplay community is to kind of let loose a little. I'm making very broad generalizations. I'm not saying everyone in the historical costuming community is like stuck up, but I think a lot of people get very concerned, like, am I going to get judged, right? If I go to an event, like someone can tell I machined the hem or whatever. Whereas the cosplay community, it's like, we got it done, let's go.
So true that in the cosplay community, there's less of a fear of judgment over technique.
And sometimes it's because also the interpretation is up to you. You know, you can see, okay, well, that's a cartoon. She has a gold there. I don't know if that's velvet. I don't know if that's plastic. I get to decide what I want it to be. Whereas from a historical standpoint, they would have said, well, that's definitely not plastic.
Because I have made a couple of historical builds now, I'm building on silhouettes. So I started with Yen, the like long sloping silhouette with a train. And then I made Amelia, who was a long sloping silhouette with a train, but lobster tail. And now I'm making Zelda, which is long sloping bustle with lobster tail plus additional lobster tail, because now I know how the lobster tails function and work. I've made 2 full sets of split drawers, and I do keep wearing those pieces. Like, now that I'm in the ecosystem of doing historical costumes, I've made one petticoat 4 times now. But like, the external vision is not piecemeal at any point. Like, it kind of stops at the foundations, and then we've built something on top of it that is completely different than the project before it.
When it comes down to the big events, like the balls or everything, there is less of an expectation that you're making something new every time. Whereas with cosplay, not only are you making something new every time, you're expected to make something new for every day. Thankfully, through Noelle, I found a whole bunch of really good friends in historical costuming, and then they were like, hey, do you want to come to this thing? Do you want to come to that thing? And I was like, you know what? Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
The projects that I put the most time into and the ones that I'm really proud of are almost always historical builds, or at least they have a historical foundation. But because I go to 4 or 5 cons a year, because I am going for, 4 days in a row, there are many costumes that I have spent just as much money or just as much time on that are just straight up street clothes, and I'm wearing them on like a comfy day. And I do bring like 4 or 5 things to every con, but one of them is the historical build that I've spent a lot of time on, and a couple of them are I'm Ken.
Cosplay in general is such a young hobby. I feel really good about it because I feel like I am like a junior and there's the senior class ahead of me, where it's like where I'm kind of like, I know that I'm not in the initial vanguard of cosplayers, but I'm like a little bit right behind, like
You're
I'm not a
in there.
child. I'm in there. It's so cool to see like people that have been doing this now, like getting into their 40s and being like, what does cosplay look like out of your 30s? Because there are still so many children that think you can't do it outside of your 20s. And I'm like,
and they will
darlings.
tell you about it too. Yeah, it's a wide spread, and that's something you don't see necessarily in the historical costuming community. So when I go to like a garden stroll, there are a lot of older people, and they're like historical reenactors, and they're like people who work at historical sites and teachers and college professors. And, the demographics change, obviously, and they will continue to change, especially with social media.
I think the impression is that historical costume tends to be slow because the popular crafters in historical costuming are the ones that are approaching it with like a historical archaeology purpose. And like a lot of these people, they are scholars of the subject who also happen to like the craft. So when they are recreating things, obviously they are sewing by hand or using extant techniques. And they're not doing that because that's how it has to be done. They're doing it because that's their niche interest. You literally took like the equivalent of a physics nerd and gave them a YouTube account. So I think there's this idea that because that's what a lot of the popular creators do, that's what is required in historical costuming, when that is absolutely not the case. And like, I know people who work like that in cosplay who work really, really slowly on one project and then they work on it forever. I know craftspeople like that. Like, that's how you work. There's just the idea and like the perception that it's more normal for historical costuming, when the only actual difference that I see is the expectation of how many things you need to make for an event. Because if it is a ball you wear one outfit to the ball. If there's a tea out after, you maybe make 2 outfits. Brand new if we're going crazy. If it's a convention, it's like you're making 3 new outfits minimum, and that's sort of the expectation.
I am absolutely that person that's like, I have all of these options, and still, rather than just making a new hat, I'm going to make a whole new gown. And rather than going back and, you know, fixing like a bunched up seam or something in a kirtle I had on 2 weeks ago, I might just decide, you know what, I've got time, and I'm just going to whip it out the night before. Once you're really into it and you're learning things and you're excited about it, it all goes out the window. And I'm absolutely crunching right now for we're going to Venice in a couple of weeks.
Let's be honest. MacFest is coming up. MacFest is, according to my phone, 11 days away, and I have.
No, it's not. No, it's not 11 days.
No. Oh no!
I hate
Is it
that.
less?
Oh my god.
Is it less?
Oh no, it's probably
thank God.
no. You're right. It's probably 11 days away. I'm just like, it can't
Yeah, no,
possibly
it is.
be
It's
11
at
days
least 11
away.
days away. That's the last thing my phone told me. And have I started anything? No, I've not.
God.
It's fine.
It'll be
Everything's fine. But you
It'll be
know, I do the same
fine.
thing for a ball. Did I work on things before I was supposed to? No, I started at 48 hours before I got on my plane for the last event that I went to. So, you know,
Yeah.
it has to do with the person, not the community. If you're in
Yes.
both, you will still function the same way.
The word accuracy gets thrown around a lot in both communities. Like with Star Wars, with cosplay, it's accuracy in terms of looking like the media is. And then with historical costuming, a lot of people are concerned about historical accuracy. Like, well, did they have that kind of fabric during that time? But I think there's a whole spectrum. Like, I wouldn't look too out of place if I went and suddenly time traveled, but I'm not sewing things by hand. If I find a good poly that looks pretty much like silk, I am happy to use it. I'm not a snob about fabrics. So I think there is in both communities often an interest in accuracy, but it's a slightly different kind of focus.
A friend of mine in drag, he said this thing that I think about all the time, how like there's some drag kings that are like really good in front of a crowd and like they're entertainers, and there's some drag kings that are like the TikTok drag kings. It's the same way that humans like evolved to have some people waking up early in the morning and some people waking up very late at night to like watch out for predators. He's like, we need all of the above.
It's exactly the same way between these, you know, not necessarily as disparate groups as we think they are between cosplay and historical costuming. Like, we really do need each other. It's so important to get offline, talk to other people. We really do need to be talking and meshing a lot more, even if it's not because we want to make a mashup.
I forgot how time consuming it is to put in boning channels. I also hand basted along the marking for the waist tape because I've actually never put in a waist tape and I don't want to lose track of it. Yeah, we've got our famous, you know, yellow thread there, and hopefully once I sew everything together, they'll all line up. I'm gonna look at my mock-up and I'm going to mark out where I'm gonna put my fakey little pattern pieces to go along the corset body so that I can use both the dupioni and the cotton on the outside layer. They're such similar colors, I think it'll look really cool, and I do want to figure out my plan for where I'm gonna put the bits of this tiny scrap of dupioni I have on that corset. I did already seam rip off the heinously Victoria's Secret coded boning channels. I'm just not going to be able to visualize it as well if I'm looking at a very high contrast mock-up when the end result is not going to be that high contrast. It is kind of ironic that I ended up adding internal boning structure to avoid making external boning structure, and now I think I am just going to end up making like fake non-functional boning structure, but oops. I realized I have not shown you my Pacific trim haul. We've got the rest of the purple lace that betrayed us so badly the other day. I've got a nice wide twill tape and a kind of matching taupe that is going to go along the inside of the corset, and I've also got a very teeny tiny satin ribbon that is going to go through the top binding. I'm really hoping that I can get the busk in today or tomorrow so that then on Saturday I can actually bring the corset together on my stream. I think that would be awesome. We'll see. Good luck out there, soldiers! When I was first cutting out this pattern, I actually didn't. Instead of cutting it out, I actually traced it onto some cheap butcher paper I have lying around. This way, if I ever want to reuse this pattern in a different size, it's gonna be way easier to use. I say cheap paper. I actually have no idea how much this drafting paper costs because I found it on the street. I was just out walking and there was a giant roll of drafting paper. If anyone ever wants to ask me what kind of paper I use for tracing, the best resource is you find on the sidewalk in Park Slope, and that's all I have to say on that. So I think what I'm going to do as far as the dupioni pattern pieces is instead of trying to reinvent the wheel with something that like goes along a lot of curve lines, what I'm actually going to do is just take the pattern piece, where the internal channels are and kind of make it so that each pattern piece has half of it that will be the dupioni fabric. So I added 5/8 seam allowance and I just drew a line where the boning channels are. I'm going to fold over the pattern piece and cut out my dupioni using that. I'm so tempted by the idea of like using cording and doing some like fabric manipulation, but I think in my heart of hearts, I should just keep it simple. The knight, she is still so young, and I've just finished stitching down all of the little dupioni panels on all 8 pattern pieces for this corset. It's technically a 10 pattern piece corset, but one of those pattern pieces is the laces, and I'm not fucking around with silk and grommets. There's a cutie little top stitch on these. I love the way the different kinds of fabric catch the light in really different ways, despite the fact that they look very similar. So the last thing I want to do before I consider these pattern pieces fully prepared and ready to pop together is I do want to have, I don't know, a little bit of fun embroidery on them. This machine is definitely not a full-scale embroidery machine, like with specialty software and everything, but it does have a really high number of decorative stitches. I tested a few different ones, and the one that I liked the best on here is actually this one that is just like a bunch of little circles. It reminds me of Pokeballs a little bit. We've been sorely missing out on the Pokemon energy. Honestly, I used every stabilizer I had in my stash to try and find a way to make the fabric not be wrinkly with this amount of embroidery, and ultimately the only thing that worked was backing it in canvas. So I'm just shifting my plan ever so slightly, and instead of leaving the fashion fabric layer and the support layer kind of unattached until I bring everything together, I am just going to treat them more like a flatlined layer. So I'm gonna put these on top of the canvas pieces, and they will be joined at the very least by that line of embroidery going down along the top stitching. It's gonna be some long seams, y'all, I can't lie, but I believe in us, and I think it's gonna be worth it in the end. The last thing I absolutely had to make sure I asked our guests while I had them here was the obvious and important question: what would you say to someone who wants to get started doing this? Whether you're a cosplayer who wants to discover the magic of starch, or you're a historical costumer who wants to deep dive into the world of spandex, what does that look like? No matter what side we're jumping in from, how can we jump the fuck in?
I don't believe that, like, in order to sew a good cosplay, you should make a pillowcase. Like, I don't think that you should start with, like, squares and quilting and then learn how to make a costume. I 100% believe in going big and going home. I get more mileage out of my excitement and more mileage out of, I have no idea how to do this and I just really want to make it, because then when I get to the end of the project, I want to make something else because I loved the process of learning things, and I love that project more than I would if I were to make 100 nothings. If you are really, really, really motivated to make something from Overwatch, then be really motivated to make something from Overwatch and do that. This is targeted. I'm bringing up everything.
Or don't.
So that
or
you
don't
have
make
to show
something
it
from
in the video.
Overwatch.
At this point, maybe not. However, remember your history, okay? Lizard.
Now your character intro is going to be like, this person's username says you should cosplay from Overwatch.
No, God.
You don't have to spend a lot of money to start. I think some people see people with these fully stocked craft rooms, not realizing, well, the person might have had those tools because they've been doing this for a dozen years and have slowly accumulated those items. So sometimes people ask me, like, what's your iron, what's your sewing machine, what's your this and this and that? And my caveat is always, I can tell you what I'm personally using, but that doesn't mean I'm telling you to buy this.
There are amazing people at maker spaces, and they're like popping up in libraries now. That's where I learned 3D printing stuff was, oh, the library is doing a seminar. I have never heard of this person, but they've been living in my area for 10 years. Like, it's mind-blowing the amount of knowledge that's out there, and all we really have to do is like get off the internet. The people I do the historical workshops with, people don't, like, the general public doesn't necessarily know who they are, and like, you have no idea the wealth of knowledge and information that is out there.
So my thing is just always start with the basics. It's kind of like learning how to do math by hand before you use a calculator. You know, get a good basic sewing machine. Doesn't have to be expensive. You can go, you know, if you live near a sewing machine shop, that's a great place to go kind of try one out, and also know that you have a resource nearby that can either give you lessons often. Get to know your machine before you get started into like the really crazy stuff.
Remember that the first thing you make is never going to be good. and that's okay. That is a-okay. And if you are planning to buy something and go in socially, approach pleasantly, and if you see something you like, tell somebody that you like it. I know that's terrifying, but consider this. They're insecure too. So if you give them a compliment, they'll be very happy. I don't know if you've noticed this, but we're all nerds who dress up, and people who wear cool costumes want to be told that their costumes are cool. So if you tell somebody that their costume is cool, that's a good approach. And if you guys end up talking after that, cool. If you don't end up talking about that, also cool.
And hey, that's how we became friends.
Can confirm.
Literally.
It does work. Proof.
A decade later.
For anyone who's thinking about getting into any costuming at all, just start doing it, and in that vein, do what you want to do with it. Costuming doesn't have to be a specific thing as compared to everyone else. You don't have to do that. You can really just do whatever you want. And then specifically with the way I approach costuming, I don't have a brand loyalty, I guess. It's never just going to be comic books. It's never just going to be video games. It's going to be both. It's going to be all three.
The bastions of people who were still posting and upkeeping blogs about historical sewing, literally stitch by stitch sometimes, was such a wealth of information. But the barrier of like entry for historical cosplay, if you don't know where to find stuff, can feel really big. Because I learned in real life spaces, and because I like learned how to construct stuff like this, when I was going to, you know, club meetings and saying, hi, I want to make this but have it look like this, there was so much more of a interaction with people in real life that was like, oh, that's really cool that you're doing that. Here's a resource that I had, or like, here is a way to do it. And it was 100% not law. I taught a lot of people there how to use stuff like foam and Warbler, and how to like create, you know, like little pieces of magic out of hot glue, because they understood sewing and fiber arts. And I was coming in with like, oh, well, I went to art school and I know how to use oil paints and like MDF and jigsaws. We're all making costumes at the end of the day, but the way that you're approaching it and the way that you are sharing information in real life is so different than it is online.
For historical stuff, though, I do have a very important tip, because I had to learn this kind of switching over to cosplay, getting fabric samples. So I use Burnley and Trowbridge. I'll give them a plug because they're amazing. They do historical fabrics and notions and books and patterns and all of these things. Each product, when you look up a product on their page, is a history lesson. And I think that's so important. And like really getting in there and just learning about the textile that you're going to be putting on your body.
Go to the thrift store and get old sheets and things so that you can practice before you mess up expensive fabric, because then you're just going to cry. I'll say don't start with velvet.
Yeah.
Even if your experience, like it wiggles, it sheds. If that's the first fabric you sew with, or anything like stretchy or super slippery, you're going to get frustrated.
We should never sew with velvet at all. I say, as someone that regularly sews with velvet, even though it's evil, it is Satan. But it looks so good. I know, it looks so good when it's done.
It's hard to put yourself into a space where people have been doing this for over a decade and be like, I'm gonna start. And then it's extra hard because the people who've done this for over a decade are the ones who are posting about it online. So that's what you see. You don't see the newbies trying their thing because they're usually posting on their private accounts and like they're not sharing with everybody. So you compare to the people who either do this professionally or semi-professionally or have been doing this for so long that like they could write multiple books on the subject, and you're just like, why am I not the same? And it's like, sweetheart, honey, of course you're not going to be that good, but it's okay because you tried, and that's all that matters.
Sometimes I look at these like really young cosplayers and costumers and I go, it is both easier and harder for you now. There's niche companies selling like good cosplay wigs, or there's niche companies selling good historical patterns. But it's harder also because you see all the stuff on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube of people presenting their best work, and the social media can be such a pressure cooker where someone feels like, oh gosh, I am seeing all this beautiful stuff. I need to make sure I look like that the first time I step out on the con floor. It's a lot more pressure.
Learn your historical silhouettes, because that's where it all started. That's where people get these artistic ideas from, like the Violet Evergardens and their, fancy gowns and the Lolita stuff and ruffles. We can all learn together. That is my advice. We can all learn the same things together.
These seams were incredibly long, but my buddy Garrick got me through them. He's just like me for real, an icon for all of us simple tailors out there. This is my first Deep Space Nine watch through, and I will never forget watching The Wire for the first time while stitching these circles. So after being baptized in one of the gayest episodes of TV I have ever seen, I get to celebrate how delicious these pieces look. These are all the way prepared and looking tidy as f***. And that means the next day I can pop in the front busk. Inserting busks seemed really intimidating to me before I did it, but I honestly think there's something even a beginner can do if you just work carefully and follow the instructions in your pattern. On the right front, I'm marking where the hooks will come out of the center seam and then just stitching that seam down, following my markings and making sure that I skip over the gaps. It's pretty satisfying. That's all there is to it. And when that's stitched and pressed, you literally just pop it in there. I like to use spray and bond to keep it in place before I baste as tight as I can around the metal. You do want to be stitching precise here, so I would definitely use a shorter stitch length. Now the left side, before you stitch anything, you want to take that finished right side and mark where the holes are. It's always better to do this with the busk you've got instead of relying on a pattern piece. Once that's marked, you can just stitch the center front seams wrong sides together, easy peasy. Then you're going to take an awl and carefully but forcefully make holes in your fabric to work the studs through. It might take a little practice to find the balance between making the holes big enough for the fabric to feed through, but not so big it messes up your garment. That means it's finally time to talk about corset construction methods.
I'm literally about to jump on stream right now, but look, we did it! We got the busk in right before stream! Yeah!
The method that I'm using has a few different names. I've seen it called the sandwich method, or a welt seam, or a folded seam corset, or a double welt corset. I highly recommend Morgan Donner's video where she goes through this technique along with 2 others. I went with this method mainly because I've done it before, but also because I find it really intuitive. I think it produces a really strong and clean final product. Now you've got to start from the center and work our way out to the back. So I'm taking my centermost pieces with the busk inserted and pinning down fashion fabric pieces wrong sides together. So these are the embroidered pieces with the canvas and the backing cotton and those funky Dupioni accents and the teeny circles I stitched last night. Then I flip the pattern piece and pin my lining piece there, also right sides together. This is the piece with the twill tape boning channel. So you're pinning on both sides and then stitching one extremely important seam. This is how both sides are going to flip down once the seam is done. I pretty much always go over the seam twice. Once it's extremely stitched down, then you can press both the front and back, and you really want to get these seams laying right because that's where your boning will go. Once it's pressed all the way to Satan and back, you just pin the edges that are closer to the back and baste that flat with wrong sides still together. And that's our next piece to pin everything onto. The cycle begins anew. You just do that over and over again and build up a corset. I did this whole thing for both sides on my Patreon live stream, and it was so much fun to turn a pile of pattern pieces into a wearable corset.
Okay, I just got off of stream and I really need to sit down. But look! We did it! I need to hydrate.
I'm getting the waist tape on later that night. Waist tapes are a little bit of structural reinforcement at the part of the corset that is going to be bearing the most tension. I like twill tape for tasks like this, and I used heat fusible to keep the tape in place while I stitched down boning channels. The nice thing about this method is the fabric itself acts like the boning case, so you just need to do 2 rows down the seam at a width that the bone will fit through. I love the way the channels look on the finished corset. And for the backmost panel, I forgot to say, you just fold over the pattern pieces to finish them. That means it's time to get out the pliers and hand presses, and after days of struggle, it's actually time for a surprise miracle. Okay, so I finally figured out what was going on with the grommets and why they weren't setting, and it turns out, hidden in my little bin was a size 5 die press. I knew I had size 4 and size 6, I didn't know a size 5 existed. So yeah, it turns out when you use the right size for the size grommets you have, the hand press just works. You know, like and subscribe for more hot tips. I got my grommets from Wawak, so I knew the grommets weren't the problem, and the hand press was a birthday present last year, so I hadn't used it a lot anyway. I'm gonna be laughing about this for forever now. I'm using the pattern to mark where I'll place the grommets and taking it all to the back panel. Some people use punches for their grommets. I prefer the awl because it means the fibers are generally being pulled instead of cut, but it does require some finesse and elbow grease. It's comedically easy now that I'm using the right size, and I'm pretty happy with these. They're not perfect, but I only accidentally did one of them upside down, so that's a win for me. We've talked about boning before. You definitely want to make sure your bones for a corset are shorter than the corset itself so you can still bind the raw edges. I know some people have a hard time getting these metal tips to cooperate, but I've somehow never had a major problem with them popping off. My pro strat though is that you've got to dual wield pliers. If you have one pair of needle noses horizontal and another vertical, the cap will go on well. But no matter how you slice it, it's just time consuming to get everything cut and tipped and inserted, but I can see the finish line approaching. After all that, this corset is really and truly almost done. My absolute last step is going to be making some quick bias tape and binding the edges, and that would be an awesome place to end this video. But there is one last little footnote that I am biologically compelled to include here. You know, like when I first started doing, I think Jane was my first. No, Mycroft was my first. Oh God. Yeah, Mycroft was my first.
Yeah. Yep. You
Yeah.
have to put Mycroft in this video now. You absolutely have to.
I was.
You have to.
This whole time we were talking.
You have to be true to the origins. You have to get out the tea set and you have to be true to the origins. You must.
So here's the story of how I got started combining historical fashion and cosplay, and the story of this corset that served me for over a decade. I was extremely on Tumblr in 2013 and very deep in the BBC Sherlock fandom. Yikes. I made a cosplay where the idea was that I was like cosplaying the apartment 221B Baker Street. I got custom printed fabric. I had a lot of details and accessories. And for me at the time, that was the most attention anything I had ever made had gotten online. A bunch of the friends I made through that post were asking me if I was going to 221B Con in Atlanta, a convention themed around Sherlock. So I figured it out and made my way to Atlanta. That inaugural first year of the con in 2013, all of us riding the high of BBC Sherlock, I actually ended up winning first place in the costume contest. But I remember being very aware the person who got second place should have won, in my humble opinion. She had made an entire Victorian Irene Adler gown. The damask that she used for the skirts was very reminiscent of the wallpaper in Irene Adler's apartment in the show. Her name is Laura, she goes by Time Stitcher online, and she was part of a whole bunch of people that I became friends with, and in that year in between the first and second 221B Con, the idea came up somehow that we should do a big group of Victorian redesigns of the BBC characters. It started out as a really big group of people who thought this was a cool idea, but only 3 of us crossed the finish line in the end. It was me, it was Lara, and it was also my friend Cecily, who had also never made a historical build before. I'd been sewing for 4 or 5 years at that point, but this was still an unbelievable challenge, and Lara was guiding Cecily and I like little ducklings. Cecily and Lara were local so they could have sewing parties, but Lara jumped on Skype to help me fit my first corset mock-up. I think she did that twice. Lara just had so much information in her head, and not just about, you know, techniques and materials, but also about resources, the kinds of blogs that I could look at and figure out how to do this stuff myself. She helped me with fabric selection, she helped me with fit issues, she helped me when it was 2 in the morning and I was panicking because I thought it was all going to turn out disastrously. Cecily and Lara went for kind of 1880s late bustle sort of silhouettes. Cecily's version was very inspired by the coat and the oh god, we called it the purple shirt of sex. That was what we called it in the fandom at the time. So Cecily had the purple skirt and a kind of coat adjacent bodice. I think they even had the little red top stitching on the buttonholes of the coat. Lara's was wild. Lara pulled from this one fashion plate she loved and made a ton of prairie points to make it be inspired by John's Christmas sweater in A Scandal in Belgravia. And because I was doing Mycroft, who's like the older one, I thought he'd be a little more outdated. So I actually went for a natural form silhouette, which is more like late 1870s. I didn't really fuck with season 3 that much, but I think Mycroft's Christmas outfit is still his sharpest fit, so that was the one that I pulled from for mine. Honestly, I had graduated college really recently. I was trying to figure out what to do with my life and hustling nonstop to make rent and afford living. And this project was like such a meaningful mountain to climb, to put so much focus and effort into, to try and really level up my sewing and learn a new skill. And I'll never forget the day we all wore them. We did brunch in our Victorian undergarments. We all had our cute little corsets, and then we got like photos in a parking lot of our finished garments. Looking back at the stuff that I've made, there is no single build where I learned as much as I did making that Mycroft. And there is no single person that I learned more from than from Lara. So that is my origin story. And hey, maybe this video will be someone else's origin story too. Thank you again to my 4 guests for your time and your thoughtfulness and for trusting me to not fuck up this edit.
Hi, I am Shasta, also known as Sci-Fi Cheer Girl. You can find me on Instagram, sometimes YouTube, and I love historical cosplay and general costumey things.
I am Vic, or Vicious Frockery. I'm available on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Vicious Frockery, or sometimes vicious.frockery. Yeah, I do kind of reconstructive Star Wars costumes, and also women covered in blood, and like that's the end of the list.
My name is Vivien. I'm known as Fresh Frippery on Instagram, on TikTok. I have a YouTube channel, also Fresh Frippery. I'm into historical costuming, I'm into cosplay, I'm into vintage fashion, I'm into nerd stuff.
My name is Nami. I am a real girl. I exist on the internet as a real human person at namisparrow. I'm on YouTube and Instagram, and those are my 2 most active.
Please go check out more of their work. And thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Remember, the first 500 people to use my link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. This is a huge way that you can help support the channel so that I can continue to produce deep dives like this. So with that, I'll catch you in the next one. Stay weird, stay hydrated. Peace out, Girl Scout.